Chapter 51. A strange sound in the night, Cloud Prayer Palace is not clean. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. A strange sound in the night, Cloud Prayer Palace is not clean. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Seeing the Empress's reaction, Lin Ran's eyes flickered. Do you know this saber? The Empress nodded subconsciously. Then, as if she had suddenly woken up, she adjusted her expression and said softly, I roughly know what's going on. I will continue to investigate this matter. You stay out of it. Lin Ran rolled his eyes. What do you mean? If I was weaker, I would be the one lying here now. You want me to stay out of it? I know you're unwilling, but this matter can't be rushed. The Empress looked straight at Lin Ran with an unprecedented solemn expression. Currently, King Zhao's accomplices are still out there in the world. This matter must not be spread. Do your job first. Lin Ran looked at the Empress's serious expression and couldn't help but feel a little strange. Even when King Zhao rebelled and the Empress was in danger, she did not look so serious. What could be more serious than King Zhao's rebellion? Lin Ran quickly recalled what the Empress had said and suddenly had a guess. Then, he smiled. I already know who the mastermind is. The Empress narrowed her eyes. How did you know? Lin Ran revealed a faint smile, but he did not answer the Empress's question directly. Instead, he analyzed, this assassin sneaked into the palace and disguised as your consort. She definitely needs someone from the palace to cooperate with her. Otherwise, it's impossible for her to have come thus far. Previously, when you were searching for King Zhao's collaborators in the palace, you didn't find anyone related to this assassin. This means that the other party has been hiding for a long time. Perhaps even King Zhao doesn't know. Am I right? The Empress's eyes flickered. Continue. Lin Ran continued to analyze, to be able to spend a few years nurturing such an assassin and set up this trap, be it manpower, material resources, or financial resources, it's not something an ordinary person can do. In the entire Heavenly Saint dynasty, only a few vassals have the ability. And you just said that internal affairs must be taken care of before taking care of the external affairs. If I'm not wrong, this internal affairs doesn't refer to the palace or the capital. The Empress looked at Lin Ran with a faint smile. So you're guessing that some vassals set all of this up? If not for this saber, I might really think that it was done by a vassal. Lin Ran chuckled and pointed at the drawing of the saber. The Heavenly Saint dynasty advocates the sword Dao. There are very few martial artists who use sabers. The style of this saber is strange. If it's really a weapon of the Heavenly Saint dynasty, I must have heard of it since I've been guarding Mount Sword for so many years. The Empress lowered her eyes and Lin Ran knew that he had guessed correctly. He took a deep breath and said firmly, the mastermind behind this assassination is the Great Yong dynasty. Sigh, you're indeed smarter than I thought. Lin Ran looked not particularly surprised. Although this answer was a little shocking, it was the most reasonable answer. The war between the Heavenly Saint dynasty and the Great Yong dynasty had been going on for a long time. Sending a few assassins and spies to each other was not uncommon. Moreover, the timing of this assassination was very ingenious. Right now, King Zhao's rebellion had just been suppressed. To the Heavenly Saint dynasty, it was a critical period for them to rest and recover. If the Empress was assassinated at this moment, the Heavenly Saint dynasty would be leaderless. If the Great Yong dynasty sent troops south, it would definitely be effortless to take down the dynasty. The Great Yong dynasty is really sinister. Lin Ran sneered, and a trace of killing intent flashed across his eyes. Don't worry. I'll go to the north now and bring back the emperor of the Great Yong dynasty. No, the Empress hurriedly stopped Lin Ran and said with a serious expression, there's an agreement between the dynasties that those above the Grandmaster realm are not allowed to participate in the war. Lin Ran was speechless. This kind of agreement is to fool children. When the country is on the verge of destruction, who cares about such things? I care. The Empress said in a low voice with a dignified expression, no matter what, those who break the agreement will become the target of public criticism. At that time, many foreign powers will send their masters to attack us with righteous cause. Lin Ran nodded thoughtfully. Got it. Whoever makes the first move is not in the right. The Empress rolled her eyes. This is not a matter of being right or not. Once a war starts, the people will die first. So what if we win? Only then did Lin Ran completely understand. He looked at the Empress with heartache. So you have to think about this every day. It seems that it's not easy for you to be the Emperor. As the Emperor, I have to be responsible for the people of the world. The Empress let out a long sigh. Her gaze landed on the assassin's corpse and she could not help but look worried. We found this assassin, but where did the real Consort Rome go? Could it be that this assassin has been Consort Rome all along? Lin Ran said firmly without hesitation, she and Consort Rome are two different people. The Empress raised her eyebrows. How can you be so sure? Well, Lin Ran hesitated for a long time and didn't know how to put it. He only raised his hand and pointed at his chest. The Empress instantly understood and a blush appeared on her face. She cleared her throat and pretended to be calm. The most important thing now is to find Consort Rome. If anything happens to her, I'm afraid it will affect General Gua, who is still in the north. Lin Ran nodded in agreement. They are probably afraid of General Gua and wanted to use this to dishearten him and bring him down. That's true, General Gua. Just as the Empress was about to say something, a rustling sound suddenly came from somewhere. The voice sounded like nails scratching on a wooden board. If one listened carefully, it sounded like a person talking, but they could not tell what it was. Lin Ran's expression changed slightly. He swallowed and asked softly, Your Majesty, didn't you say that the noise in the Cloud Prayer Palace was just an excuse for Consort Rome to get you to come over? The Empress's expression was solemn. I was just guessing. Ever since Consort Rome entered the palace, this is the first time I've come to the Cloud Prayer Palace. Didn't you hear the noise last time you came? I was too busy to care about it. As soon as Lin Ran finished speaking, he felt that something was wrong. He turned around and realized that the Empress was indeed staring at him strangely. At this moment, the strange sound was heard again. Lin Ran listened carefully and pointed at the bed. Over there. Before he could finish speaking, Lin Ran had already flashed to the bed like a ghost. The yin-yang sword flashed in his hand and slashed out sword energy. In the blink of an eye, the carved wooden bed was cut into pieces. All the cuts were extremely clean. The wood was scattered, but there was nothing under the bed. Just as Lin Ran was feeling strange, the noise sounded again. Chapter 52. Hidden Sword Pavilion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. Hidden Sword Pavilion. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Seeing that Lin Ran had cut open the bed, the Empress came closer and realized that there was nothing under the bed. She couldn't help but look puzzled. It ran away. Impossible. Although Lin Ran did not use his full strength in that strike just now, it was still extremely fast. Even a grandmaster would not be able to dodge it easily. Just as the Empress was about to say something, the strange sound was heard again. The two of them looked at each other. Lin Ran pointed at the floor under the bed, indicating that the sound was coming from below. The Empress nodded and took a few steps back. Lin Ran slashed out his sword energy again and cut open the floor. Only then did he realize that there was a secret compartment below. A woman in pink was tied up and hidden inside. It was Consort Rome, who had been missing for a long time. At this moment, Consort Rome's face was pale and her breathing was weak. Even if the wooden board in front of her was cut open by the sword energy, she did not react at all. She only kept scratching the surrounding wooden board with her nails. It was obvious that she was already unconscious. Lin Ran jumped down into the secret compartment and checked her pulse. He turned around and said to the Empress, "She's fine. She was just drugged." The Empress nodded and was about to call for help when Lin Ran stopped her in a low voice. Before she could ask, she saw Lin Ran take off his yellow robe, revealing his well-defined muscles. The Empress immediately felt her face heat up. She hurriedly looked away and asked in a low voice, "What do you want to do? Now is not the time to do that kind of thing. What are you thinking about?" Lin Ran rolled his eyes and said angrily, "It'll be hard to explain if others see us dressed like this. Put on your robe. After you change, give me my clothes." With that, Lin Ran hid behind the screen, clearly indicating that he wouldn't peep. The Empress picked up the yellow robe hesitantly. She could still smell Lin Ran's scent on it. It was like grass mixed with dew and smelled very fresh. However, this was the robe that the man had just worn. However, the Empress also knew that Lin Ran was right. She was wearing the uniform of a guard commander. If outsiders saw her, she would be put in a difficult position. Thinking of this, the Empress no longer hesitated. She glanced at the screen and made sure that Lin Ran was not peeping at her before she slowly untied her clothes, but she did not notice a puddle of water slowly flowing out from under the screen. When the Empress took off her clothes, the water on the ground suddenly rippled. "I thought that Consort Jean of Hishang Palace was unmatched. I didn't expect her to be even more busted than her." As expected, one shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Lin Ran thought to himself and looked at her critically for a while. Only when the Empress put on the yellow robe did he reluctantly retreat behind the screen. "I'm done," the Empress said softly with a hint of shyness in her voice. At the same time, a few pieces of clothes were placed on the screen. Lin Ran put on his clothes and walked out of the screen. Suddenly, a few sword energies shot out and disfigured the assassin. "Lin Ran! What are you doing?" When the Empress saw this scene, she couldn't help but reveal a sullen expression. "She's already dead. Even if she's an assassin, you can't treat her like this." Lin Ran glanced at the Empress and said helplessly, "Do you think I want to? She looks like Consort Rong. If I don't ruin her face, how will you explain it later?" Only then did the Empress react and stop blaming him. Then, Lin Ran rescued Consort Rong from the secret compartment, untied her, and placed her aside. He then dragged the assassin's corpse to the outer hall and gestured for the Empress to call for help. "Assassin! Guard, where is the guard?" With that, several guards immediately barged in, followed by Li Tianyi with a few eunuchs. However, when everyone entered, they saw the Empress being protected by Lin Ran. There was only an unrecognizable corpse on the ground. Li Tianyi was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly went forward and asked, "Your Majesty, are you harmed?" "I'm fine." The Empress waved her hand and pointed at the corpse on the ground. "Just now, this person took advantage of my carelessness and appeared from under the bed to assassinate me. Fortunately, Lord Lin reacted quickly and killed the assassin. However, Consort Rong was drugged by the assassin and fainted. Quick, go and summon the imperial physician to treat her." Li Tianyi immediately went to fetch the imperial physician. Lin Ran secretly gave the Empress a look and snuck out unnoticed. By the next morning, the news of the Emperor's assassination had already spread throughout the palace. The civil and military officials waiting in the hall discussed animatedly. However, the Empress had no intention of hiding anything. In the morning court assembly, she briefly explained this matter and rewarded Lin Ran with some gold, silver, and jewelry. The ministers in the hall couldn't help but flatter Lin Ran. Similar assassinations happened a few times a year. The Empress did not seem to mind, so the others were used to it. Just like that, this assassination incident was forgotten after the morning court assembly. As for how dangerous it was, only Lin Ran and the Empress knew. In the blink of an eye, 2 days passed. During this period of time, Lin Ran changed into sword god's attire and appeared in the palace a few times. The rest of the time, he had been cultivating in Mingzhou Hall. The Empress summoned him, but he turned it down with the excuse that he had suffered internal injuries from fighting the assassin. The Empress knew that he was avoiding her, but she couldn't do anything. It was strange that Lin Ran's cultivation speed had slowed down after entering the half-saint realm. No matter how hard he cultivated, he could not sense any improvement. Even the sign-in system went dormant. It seemed that the system had classified the palace as a location. He had previously signed in the throne room, so this location was already expired. This morning, Lin Ran was meditating in Mingzhou Hall when he suddenly sensed someone approaching the door. He thought that it should be the young eunuch who came to deliver food, so Lin Ran didn't mind and continued cultivating. In fact, given his current cultivation level, he no longer needed to eat or drink. However, since he lived in the palace, he was naturally given the best treatment. Therefore, even if he never ate the food would still be delivered to him. But after half an hour, Lin Ran felt that something was wrong. In the past, this young eunuch would leave after delivering food. Why was he still here today? Puzzled, Lin Ran stopped cultivating and got up. He put on his sword god outfit and prepared to go out to take a look. Lin Ran activated Endless Sword Intense to protect himself. He waved his hand and opened the door with sword energy. Only then did he realize that it was not a eunuch outside at all, but Zhou Hao, who was ranked second in the martial arts examination. Zhou Hao stood at the door with a hesitant expression. The sudden appearance of the 10 Miles Sword God shocked him. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and said, "Greetings, 10 Miles Sword God." "You," Lin Ran subconsciously wanted to ask, "why are you here?" But just as he opened his mouth, he immediately changed his words. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Zhou Hao did not suspect anything. He knelt on the ground and explained, "I'm the Imperial Guard, Zhou Hao. A few days ago, an assassination was attempted on His Majesty, so His Majesty wanted to strengthen the security. The Hidden Sword Pavilion will be opened today to provide the guards with new sets of armors and weapons. I took the liberty to come here to ask you if you're interested in visiting the Sword Pavilion." Hidden Sword Pavilion. Lin Ran's eyes lit up when he heard this. He had once heard from Daoist Li that Mount Sword wasn't the only place where swords were collected and stored in the Heavenly Saint Dynasty. The other place was the Hidden Sword Pavilion in the palace. Chapter 53. Heavenly Saint Dynasty's Hidden. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 53. Heavenly Saint Dynasty's Hidden Sword Pavilion. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. According to Daoist Li, on the surface, the Hidden Sword Pavilion was the armory for the palace guards. In fact, there was a secret room inside. Most of the divine artifacts stored there were used by famous generals. After the generals died on the battlefield or retired to the countryside, they would keep the weapons they used in the Hidden Sword Pavilion. When the generals in the future made extraordinary contributions, the royal family would reward them with this. It was considered a supreme honor for the soldiers. Therefore, compared to the divine weapons of Mount Sword, the divine weapons in the Hidden Sword Pavilion not only had incomparable power, but they were also passed down from generation to generation. When Lin Ran first arrived in the palace, he had also wanted to go to the Hidden Sword Pavilion to expand his knowledge, but he had never found a good cause to do so. Now that the Empress was preparing to open the Hidden Sword Pavilion, wasn't this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? If he could obtain the inheritance of a famous general in the Hidden Sword Pavilion, his cultivation might advance further. Thinking of this, Lin Ran immediately became excited, but he still pretended to be calm. "I didn't want to join in the fun, but since you're sincere in inviting me, I'll go with you." "Thank you, Sword God." Zhou Hao was overjoyed. Then, he took out a wooden box from his pocket. After opening it, he carefully took out an incomplete manual. Sword God, this is the sword manual that has been passed down in the Zhou family for generations. Unfortunately, it's incomplete. Although it's nothing to you, it's the most precious gift I can give. Lin Ran looked puzzled. What is this all about, Imperial Guard Zhou? Zhou Hao replied in a low voice in embarrassment, to be honest, I have my own selfish motives for inviting you today. I've long heard that the 10-mile sword god has a pair of discerning eyes that can distinguish the divine weapons in the world, so I want you to choose a suitable weapon for me. Please fulfill my wish. No problem. Lin Ran nodded without hesitation and put away the sword manual. As for choosing a weapon for Zhou Hao, he did not take it to heart at all. Zhou Hao was just an ordinary guard. There were thousands of such guards in the palace. Even if the guards were going to get new weapons, they couldn't possibly be allowed to use divine weapons. If he agreed, he would get a sword manual for nothing. Why would Lin Ran say no? Unfortunately, Zhou Hao did not know he was being fooled. Seeing that the sword god agreed so readily, Zhou Hao was so happy that the corners of his mouth were about to reach the back of his head. He lay on the ground and kowtowed to thank him. Lin Ran was worried that he would have a concussion from kowtowing like that. After Zhou Hao was done kowtowing, he added, Sword God, I still have to inform the commander of the guards, Lin Ran. Please wait here for a moment. Stop. Lin Ran hurriedly called out to stop Zhou Hao. I heard that His Majesty was assassinated a few days ago and Commander Lin was injured while protecting him. Let him rest and recover. When Zhou Hao heard this, he cupped his hands and said in admiration, Sword God, although you've been staying in Mingzhou Hall all this while, you know everything in the palace like the back of your hand. I simply can't express how much I admire you. Lin Ran waved his hand and said indifferently. Don't waste time. Lead the way. Yes. Under Zhou Hao's lead, the two of them left Mingzhou Hall and arrived at the hidden sword pavilion in the northeast corner of the palace. When Lin Ran arrived, the place was already filled with people lining up to receive their new weapons. Fortunately, these guards were well trained. They lined up in small groups and handed over their swords one after another. Then, the officials of the hidden sword pavilion distributed new swords to them. The entire process was orderly. Although there were many people, it was not messy at all. Lin Ran nodded in approval. The Empress really had a way of managing such a big palace. However, Zhou Hao couldn't stay calm. He thought that he could enter the hidden sword pavilion to choose a weapon of his choice, so he gave his precious manual to 10-mile sword god. He didn't expect the process would be done in this way. Then wouldn't his sword manual be given away for nothing? Thinking of this, Zhou Hao immediately felt his blood boil. Lin Ran, who was standing at the side, sensed something wrong. Before Zhou Hao could speak, he took the initiative to speak first. Guard Zhou, I'm afraid I can't do what you wanted me to. This sword manual, you can keep it. Take it as a gift from me. Zhou Hao replied with a pained expression. In fact, he had stolen this sword manual from his family. He thought that he would be able to choose a divine weapon. He did not expect to end up with nothing. However, if he could use this sword manual to get close to the 10-mile sword god, Zhou Hao thought it was worth it. At the very least, his father wouldn't beat him to death for the sake of the 10-mile sword god. Lin Ran didn't care. He nodded and walked straight to the hidden sword pavilion. When the guards saw a black-clothed figure walking over with endless sword intent, they immediately knelt down. Even the officials of the hidden sword pavilion hurriedly stood up from their seats and knelt down to welcome the sword god. The Empress had long ordered that the 10-mile sword god could go where he wished in the palace and no one was to stop him. Lin Ran took advantage of this privilege today. He raised his hand and gestured for everyone to stand up before walking into the hidden sword pavilion. As soon as he stepped across the threshold, a familiar voice sounded in Lin Ran's mind. Ding! Special location detected. The host is in the Heavenly Saint Dynasty's Hidden Sword Pavilion. Host, do you want to sign in? Lin Ran was delighted. His previous guess was right. A location with divine weapons was a special location. At the same time, Lin Ran also noticed that the location detected by the system was the Heavenly Saint Dynasty's Hidden Sword Pavilion. In other words, there were also Hidden Sword Pavilion in other dynasties. If he had the chance to visit the Hidden Sword Pavilion of other dynasties, who knew how many rewards he would receive? After being excited for a while, Lin Ran calmed down and began to size up the Hidden Sword Pavilion. The first thing he saw was rows of weapon racks made of ebony. Standard longswords were placed neatly in the rack. Just by standing in front of them, one could feel the sharp sword intent contained in them. However, Lin Ran's goal this time was the secret room in the Hidden Sword Pavilion. Even if he wiped these weapons and signed in, he probably wouldn't get anything good. Thinking of this, Lin Ran continued walking. He quickly passed through the rows of weapon racks and walked straight to the secret room in the depths. Lin Ran remembered that Daoist Li had said that the secret room in the Hidden Sword Pavilion was surrounded by layers of weapon racks, which was the center of the Hidden Sword Pavilion. However, Lin Ran walked all the way to the end of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and didn't see anything that looked like a room. Could it be that the secret room has been moved away? Chapter 54. The Truth About the Hidden Sword Pavilion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. The Truth About the Hidden Sword Pavilion. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. With doubts in his heart, Lin Ran turned around and walked towards the door. This time, Lin Ran walked very slowly. Along the way, he kept looking around and even used his spiritual energy to investigate. However, even when he reached the door, he still did not find any traces of the secret room. Just as Lin Ran was feeling puzzled, an official from the Hidden Sword Pavilion walked in and bowed with his left hand on his chest. Greetings, 10 Miles Sword God. Lin Ran retracted his thoughts. Looking at Lu Tao's imperial attire, he knew that he was a fourth-grade official. He asked, Lord Lu, what's the matter? Lu Tao smiled and probed, I noticed just now that you seem to be looking for something in the Hidden Sword Pavilion. I've been staying here for a long time. Perhaps I can be of service to you. That when Lin Ran heard this, he felt that it was a good idea, so he pretended to be calm and said, I'm not looking for anything in particular. I just heard that the Hidden Sword Pavilion has a collection of many famous generals' weapons, so I wanted to see them for myself. Famous generals' weapons. When Lu Tao heard this, he looked confused. Sword God, where did you hear the rumors? I've been in the Hidden Sword Pavilion for 7 years and have never heard of any weapons from famous generals. No, this time, Lin Ran was completely stunned. Had he been deceived by Daoist Li? However, if there were no famous general weapons here, why would the system ring? Could it be that it was a special location without weapons? As soon as this thought appeared, Lin Ran immediately denied it. Ever since he awakened the system, Lin Ran had only signed in at Mount Sword. The great opportunities he obtained were also related to the divine weapons in Mount Sword. Therefore, there was no doubt that the system and divine weapons were inextricably linked. At that time, Lin Ran was just a mountain guard. Daoist Li had no reason to lie to him, so there must be a secret room here. It was just that he had yet to find the right way to find it. Thinking of this, Lin Ran waved at Lu Tao. It's fine. You can leave first. I'll look around. Lu Tao nodded and walked away, and Lin Ran returned to the center of the Hidden Sword Pavilion. The exterior of the Hidden Sword Pavilion was an octagonal building, and the weapons racks were arranged according to the 8 trigrams. In the middle of the Hidden Sword Pavilion was the 8 trigrams. Logically speaking, if there was a secret treasure room hidden here, it was most likely in the center. Lin Ran found the center and sat down cross-legged. He looked around and suddenly felt a little strange. Logically speaking, for the sake of convenience, these weapon racks should be arranged in a straight line, but in reality, all the weapon racks were placed in a staggered manner. From Lin Ran's point of view, there seemed to be endless weapons racks in all directions. Lin Ran closed his eyes and fell into deep thought. A thought flashed through his mind. He knew what he had thought of, but he just couldn't grasp the message of it. Just as Lin Ran was feeling anxious, a few officials who came in to get swords saw him sitting there cross-legged. They did not dare to disturb him and quietly took the swords and left. When one of them passed by Lin Ran, he couldn't help but stagger and a long sword fell from his arms. The hilt of the sword hit the ground and slipped out of the scabbard with a clang. The snow-white sword drew an arc in the air and landed in Lin Ran's palm. Oh no! Lin Ran's expression changed drastically and he hurriedly withdrew his palm, but it was too late. Ding! Congratulations to the host for successfully signing in and obtaining the Chiman sword technique. A golden light that ordinary people could not see entered his glabella. After signing in a few times, Lin Ran already had a preliminary understanding of the mechanism of this system. Although he could sign in at the same location repeatedly, the rewards he obtained the first time were the best. For example, the formless sword body, he obtained in Mount Sword, and the 9 yin yang swords, he obtained in the throne room. At the same time, the value of the system reward was also related to the sword Lin Ran had wiped when he signed in. When he wiped those divine weapons on Mount Sword, the rewards he obtained were all extremely difficult to obtain just by cultivating like sword bodies and sword intent. When he wiped ordinary swords, he could only obtain cultivation techniques and sword techniques. Therefore, before coming to the hidden sword pavilion, Lin Ran had made up his mind to find a divine weapon. He did not expect this standard longsword to find its way to touch him. The ancient manual slowly unfolded in his mind. Lin Ran was surprised to find that although this reward was called a sword technique, it was actually more like a movement technique. However, the content of the manual was too obscure. Lin Ran, who was feeling frustrated, was really not in the mood to study it. He only read it briefly before throwing it to the back of his mind. At this moment, when the low-ranking official saw that the sword had actually fallen into the hands of the sword god, his face instantly turned pale. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly. "Sword god, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I didn't do it on purpose. Please forgive me." The other low-ranking officials also knelt down like a group of frightened quails, trembling and not daring to speak. "Forget it, it's all fate." Lin Ran waved and dismissed them, sounding indescribably frustrated. After being disturbed by this low-ranking official, Lin Ran no longer had the mood to continue searching for the secret room. Since he had already obtained the reward for signing in today, he planned to go back and study the manual before coming back tomorrow. After making up his mind, Lin Ran walked out absent-mindedly. However, as he walked, he realized that something was wrong. He seemed to have arrived at a place he had never been to before. He was surrounded by weapons racks made of ebony. The long swords on the racks were arranged exactly the same, but he felt that he had never been to this place before. Lin Ran stood on his tiptoes and could see that the door of the hidden sword pavilion was not far to the right. However, a thought suddenly occurred to him that drove him to walk to the left. This thought appeared for no reason, but the driving force was very strong. It was as if there was a pair of invisible hands pushing him from behind, making Lin Ran feel that he had to go left. Chiman technique. Chiman. Chiman. Lin Ran suddenly felt enlightened. No wonder the weapon racks here were placed like this. It turned out that someone had done it on purpose. The few officials just now were the best example. Logically speaking, when they saw Lin Ran sitting there, they would definitely take a detour. However, they still walked past him. There must be a reason why they did that. In other words, their path in the hidden sword pavilion was fixed. Once they deviated from the path, something bad would happen. They would be lost in the Chiman array. This also explained why Lu Tao did not know about the existence of the secret room. The technique of the mystic sect was obscure and mysterious. Even Lin Ran was tricked when he entered. Even if Lu Tao and the others guarded here until they died, they would not know the truth of the hidden sword pavilion. After figuring this out, Lin Ran immediately moved between the weapons racks. Soon, a black boulder appeared out of thin air in front of him. Chapter 55. The key to open the treasure vault. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. The key to open the treasure vault. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The huge boulder was about the height of a person. Because it was blocked by many weapon racks, its size could not be seen. It was pitch black, but its surface emitted a grayish white luster. With just a glance, Lin Ran confirmed that this boulder was the same thing as the material on Mount Sword. Daoist Li had once told Lin Ran that Mount Sword was formed by a very special mineral. Not only could this mineral nurture the sword intent in the divine weapon, but it could also form a natural barrier and keep these sword intents within the mountain range. That was why the outside world did not know much about the situation of Mount Sword. The appearance of the boulder here explained why Lin Ran could not sense any sword intent previously. While he was thinking, Lin Ran had already arrived in front of the huge boulder. It was about the width of 6 people standing side by side, but Lin Ran could only see a portion of it. It was unknown what was hidden underneath it. At the same time, Lin Ran sensed a faint and sharp sword intent. This wisp of sword intent was hidden among the tens of thousands of standard swords in the hidden sword pavilion. It was as inconspicuous as a red leaf in the pine forest. The Chiman array hid the treasure vault, and tens of thousands of standard swords covered the sword intent. With just 2 simple arrangements, the treasure vault disappeared from the hidden sword pavilion. Lin Ran placed his hand on the boulder and touched the material that he was familiar with. He couldn't help but look nostalgic. Now that he was a master of the half-saint realm, it was hard to find a match for him in the world. However, his happiest time was actually when he was guarding Mount Sword. After reminiscing for a while, Lin Ran got down to business. He first walked around the boulder but could not find any clues to the entrance. There were no flaws or cracks on the surface, except for a sword mark on the northeast side of it. The sword mark was about 3 fingers long. Lin Ran tried to use his spiritual energy to feel it, but just as he injected his spiritual energy into the sword mark, he heard a loud clanging sound. The surging sword intent surged out and forced him back a few steps. What a domineering sword intent! Lin Ran's expression changed drastically as he exclaimed. Ever since he stepped into the martial Tao, he had never felt such a sharp sword intent. Even the 10 miles dragon roar that contained the sword intent of the sword god was probably only a tenth of this sword intent. One had to know that the 10 miles sword god was already at the peak of the senior grandmaster realm at that time. Even if only a portion of his sword intent was left in the 10 miles dragon roar, it was enough to shake the world. How could anyone's sword intent be more powerful than the 10 miles sword gods? After the shock, Lin Ran felt puzzled. He frowned and pondered. Soon, he realized something strange. Although the sword intent just now was surging and fierce, it did not contain any hostility. Compared to an attack, it was more like a respected senior demonstrating to a junior. Most importantly, Lin Ran seemed to feel a sense of familiarity and closeness from the sword intent. Could it be because of this huge rock boulder from Mount Sword? Lin Ran guessed and shook his head. No. Daoist Li said that this boulder can only nurture and contain sword intent, but it won't affect the essence of the sword intent. Lin Ran fell into deep thought again. His gaze subconsciously landed on the sword mark. The more he looked at it, the more familiar it looked, but he couldn't remember where he had seen it before. What exactly is this? Lin Ran stroked the sword mark and muttered to himself. This time, he did not try to test it, so the sword intent was not triggered. At the same time, the familiar and intimate feeling became stronger. Looking into the deep crack of the sword mark, Lin Ran seemed to see another world in it. There was a figure in black walking among tens of thousands of soldiers with a sword in his hand. With just a light wave of his sword, a surging sword intent filled the world. The enemy fell to the ground like wheat being cut, but the black-robed figure remained calm. He was like a graceful dragon amidst the lights and sword shadows. 10 miles dragon roar. Lin Ran's eyes lit up, and the battlefield in front of him disappeared. At this moment, he was enlightened. No wonder this sword mark was so familiar. This was the sword mark left behind by the 10-mile sword god. The sword of the sword god, 10-mile dragon roar, was the key to opening this divine sword treasure vault. Without needing to confirm it, Lin Ran knew that he was right. What he had to do next was very simple. He had to obtain the 10 miles dragon roar, open the treasure vault, and use the famous divine weapon inside to sign in for the reward. The only problem was that in order to reassure the Empress, Lin Ran had left the 10 miles dragon roar under her pillow. This broken sword was of great significance to the Empress. If he asked for it, she might not give it back, and there was nothing he could do about it. The safest way was to sneak into her bedroom at night and steal it. At most, he would send it back after using it. After making up his mind, Lin Ran took one last look at the sword mark and left the hidden sword pavilion. After returning to Mingzhou Hall, Lin Ran changed into the uniform of the guard commander and went out again. Changing weaponry was a big thing for the palace guards. Although Lin Ran didn't care about those standard swords, he was the commander of the Imperial Guards after all. It wasn't appropriate for him to not show up. Lin Ran returned to the hidden sword pavilion as if nothing had happened. At this moment, most of the guards had received their new swords, and only 100 or so people were still waiting in line. Lin Ran waited quietly at the back of the line while thinking about his plan to sneak into the Empress's bedroom tonight. At this moment, a group of eunuchs in palace clothes walked into the courtyard. The person in the lead was wearing a purple robe and a jade belt. He held a Tai Chi whisk in his hand. It was Li Tianyi, the head eunuch. A few eunuchs followed behind with a big brass lock. The lock was 3 feet square, and there was a bent copper rod protruding from each corner. It was completely different from the shape of an ordinary copper lock. Lin Ran could recognize it as a lock thanks to the pentagonal keyhole on the front. Looking at the exhausted expressions of the eunuchs, Lin Ran knew that the weight of this lock was definitely not light. It was probably used to lock the sword pavilion. It seems that other than the 10 miles dragon roar, I have to think of a way to steal the key for this lock. Lin Ran thought to himself. At this moment, Li Tianyi had already entered the courtyard. He ignored the guards in line and walked straight towards the hidden sword pavilion. Lu Tao was supervising the procedure when he saw Li Tianyi suddenly show up. He hurriedly walked up and greeted, "Greetings, Eunuch Li." Lu Tao's attitude was very humble. Although the two of them were both fourth-grade officials, one was the head of all eunuchs in the imperial palace who was with the emperor all the time, and the other was a military official who was not even qualified to attend the court meeting. Their status in the palace was naturally incomparable. Li Tianyi waved his hand and asked absent-mindedly, "His Majesty sent me to ask you how the matter of changing the sword is going." "Eunuch Li, most of the guards in the palace have already upgraded their swords. There are only 100 people left in line." "Good." Li Tianyi nodded and waved his Tai Chi whisk impatiently. "Let them go back. Someone. Lock the door." Chapter 56. Dilemma. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. Dilemma. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. As soon as Li Tianyi finished speaking, a few eunuchs carried the brass lock over. The expressions of the 100 guards who had yet to change their swords turned ugly. However, when they saw that it was Li Tianyi who gave the order, they held back their anger. Only Lin Ran's eyes darkened as if he was thinking about something. Lu Tao hurriedly stopped the young eunuch and asked with a smile, "Eunuch Li, these people have yet to change their swords. If His Majesty finds out and blames me, I won't be able to bear the responsibility. Li Tianyi's expression darkened. What? You're being inefficient, so naturally you are to blame. Do you want me to wait for you here? Lu Tao hurriedly shook his head. No, no, that's not what I mean. But uniquely, changing the sword is His Majesty's order, locking down the hidden sword pavilion is also His Majesty's order. Li Tianyi reprimanded coldly. Lu Tao immediately lowered his head, not daring to talk back. Li Tianyi snorted and waved his Tai Chi whisk at the eunuchs. Lock it. Wait. Someone sounded. Li Tianyi was furious. His face turned cold as he wanted to see who was so bold as to stop him. He turned around and saw Lin Ran walking out of the line. Seeing that face, Li Tianyi immediately recalled the night the assassination was attempted on the emperor. He was so frightened by Lin Ran that he knelt down uncontrollably and made a fool of himself. The anger in his heart immediately rose. When everyone saw this, they couldn't help but feel puzzled, not knowing why Li Tianyi got so angry just because he was interrupted. Naturally, they didn't know about the grudge between Lin Ran and Li Tianyi. Besides, although Lin Ran had saved the emperor a few days ago, he had just entered the palace, so very few people knew him. However, when the guards saw that someone was standing up for them, they couldn't help but look happy. They looked at Lin Ran with admiration and gratitude, but when they thought about how he interrupted Li Tianyi, worry appeared on their faces. Lu Tao sensed that Li Tian was angry and quickly went forward to stop Lin Ran. He pretended to be angry and said, "Who are you? How dare you shout?" Lin Ran stood still and cupped his hands. "Greetings, Lord Lu. I'm the new commander of Imperial Guards, Lin Ran." "Who is Lin Ran? That name sounds familiar, L.C., don't you know? A few days ago, he saved His Majesty. Now, he's highly valued and trusted by His Majesty. I remember now. No wonder he dared to talk back to eunuchly. It turns out that he has the Emperor's support." After Lin Ran introduced himself, the guards in the courtyard immediately started discussing. Lu Tao was delighted inwardly. The commander of the Imperial Guards was a third-grade official, 1 grade higher than him. From Lin Ran's attitude, it was obvious that he was here to go against eunuchly. "So it's Commander Lin. It's an honor to meet you." Just as Lu Tao was thinking about how to compliment Lin Ran, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. "It's the first time I met Commander Lin. How did Commander Lin know my name?" Well, Lin Ran's expression froze. He couldn't possibly say that he was here just now, right? Fortunately, Lin Ran was quick-witted. He smiled calmly. "Lord Lu is the deputy commander of the palace arsenal and controls all the weapons in the palace. As the commander of the guards, I've heard a lot about you, but I've been too busy with work to visit you." Lin Ran's flattery was just right. Not only did he praise Lu Tao, but he also did not degrade himself. Lu Tao naturally did not suspect anything else. He waved his hand and said politely, "Lord Lin, you're being too serious. I'm just a 4th-grade official. I should be the one visiting you." Ahem. Li Tianyong coughed a few times to interrupt the two of them. He asked coldly with an unfriendly expression, "Lord Lu, Commander Lin, if the two of you want to chat, please find another place. Don't delay my task of closing the hidden sword pavilion." Only then did Lu Tao remember eunuchly was also here. He looked down and realized that Lin Ran was using an old sword. He immediately had an idea. "Eunuchly." Lu Tao bowed with a smile and continued, "I don't dare to waste your time, but Commander Lin is still using an old sword. Can you wait for a moment?" Li Tianyi glanced at Lin Ran coldly. "I'm in charge of the palace affairs every day. How can I waste time here? Lock the door." "You can try." Lin Ran took a step forward and asked without looking back, "Lord Lu, what did His Majesty say?" Commander Lin, previously, His Majesty issued an order to upgrade the swords for the palace guards. Before noon, the guards have to have their new swords. Midnight. Lin Ran muttered softly and looked up at the sky. It's about 7 in the morning. It's not time to lock the door yet. Lord Lu, continue with your task. Hearing this, Lu Tao's heart skipped a beat. Although there was no sundial here, he had been delayed by the 10-mile sword god for a while. He knew that it was definitely past noon, so he did not disobey eunuchly. He did not expect Lin Ran to mention the time. As expected, as soon as Lin Ran finished speaking, Li Tianyi scolded angrily, "Nonsense. It's clearly past noon." Lin Ran ignored him and continued to look at the sky. He said indifferently, "Is that so? I think it's 7 in the morning. Isn't that so, Lord Lu?" "Ha!" Lu Tao stood rooted to the ground and did not dare to speak. If he said yes, he would inevitably offend Li Tianyi, but if he said no, he would offend Lin Ran. This was really a dilemma. Fortunately, the two of them were already in a confrontation, so no one cared about Lu Tao's answer. Li Tian's expression darkened. Although he wanted to cut Lin Ran into pieces, he didn't dare to do so in public. After a short moment of thought, Li Tianyi said, "Commander Lin, I'm under orders. If you're displeased, I can get Lord Lu to change your sword. However, it's already late. I hope Commander Lin won't continue to stop me from locking the door." Everyone present could tell that Li Tianyi was using the emperor to suppress Lin Ran. Lin Ran smiled and didn't answer. Instead, he asked politely, after hearing what eunuch Li said, "I just remembered that I haven't paid my respects to His Majesty today. Where is His Majesty now?" Li Tianyi didn't know what Lin Ran wanted to do. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "His Majesty just had lunch and should be resting." "Thank you." Lin Ran bowed and looked at Lu Tao. "Lord Lu, wait here for a moment." With that, Lin Ran turned around and left. Everyone was confused. They didn't understand why Lin Ran suddenly backed down. Li Tianyi was also puzzled, but he did not waste his time dwelling on it. His intuition told him that he could not let Lin Ran see the emperor. Otherwise, he would definitely be in trouble. Chapter 57. It's a blessing in disguise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. It's a blessing in disguise. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. After instructing his eunuchs to close the hidden sword pavilion, Li Tianyi immediately rushed to the Hall of Mental Cultivation where the emperor was resting. After rushing to the Hall of Mental Cultivation, he saw Lin Ran standing outside the door with the palace guards. His hand was on the hilt of his sword, and his expression was cold. He looked majestic. Seeing this, Li Tian was puzzled. He thought that Lin Ran was here to complain to the emperor. Why was he standing at the door? At this moment, Lin Ran also saw Li Tianyi. He chuckled and went forward to ask, "Eunuch Li, you're so fast. Has the hidden sword pavilion been closed?" Seeing Lin Ran's calm attitude, Li Tianyi couldn't help but be vigilant. He nodded and replied, "Thank you for asking, Commander Lin. What are you doing here?" Lin Ran smiled and returned to his post silently. The ominous feeling in Li Tianyi's heart intensified. Just as he was thinking about how to find out, he heard the Empress's voice coming from inside. "Someone. Prepare the carriage. I'm going to the Imperial Study." "Yes, Your Majesty." Li Tianyi replied loudly. Then, he hurriedly entered the Hall of Mental Cultivation to help the Empress out. Seeing the Empress come out, the palace guards hurriedly knelt down and greeted. Only one person remained standing. It was the commander of the Imperial Guards, Lin Ran. The Empress had just taken a nap and was still a little sleepy. For a moment, she did not recognize Lin Ran. When she saw that someone was not kneeling, she immediately looked displeased. "How dare you? Why aren't you kneeling when you see me?" Lin Ran calmly took off the sword belt and held it in his hand. Your Majesty. My sword has been in poor condition for a long time. Just now, the sword belt suddenly fell off. I was in panic and forgot to kneel. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Only then did the Empress recognize Lin Ran. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So it's Lord Lin. This morning, I gave the order for every palace guard to upgrade their sword. Why haven't you got your new sword yet? Your Majesty. I went late due to some official affairs. The hidden sword pavilion has already closed. The same goes for the 100 or so guards. Hearing this, Li Tiany's expression changed. He thought to himself, you little bastard, so this is what you are trying to do. As expected, the Empress's expression instantly darkened. She pondered for a moment and shouted, guards. Summon the deputy commander of the palace arsenal. Soon, Lu Tao was brought over from the hidden sword pavilion. He was so frightened that he knelt on the ground and did not dare to move. The Empress frowned slightly and asked in a low voice, Lord Lu, changing swords is a huge matter. Even if some guards are late, they should still be allowed to upgrade their swords. How can you make the decision on your own to close the hidden sword pavilion? Your Majesty. I'm innocent. Your Majesty. I want to say something. Lu Tao's eyes turned red and he was about to defend himself when Li Tiany suddenly interrupted. Li Tiany knew that he couldn't afford to let Lin Ran be a few moves ahead of him anymore. Without waiting for Lu Tao to continue, Li Tiany told the Empress what had happened truthfully, and repeatedly emphasized that Lin Ran and the others had missed the time and that he was just following orders. Lin Ran listened silently and did not interrupt. When Li Tiany finished speaking, Lin Ran took a step forward and said, Your Majesty, may I ask when assassins usually assassinate? As soon as these words were spoken, the expressions of everyone present changed drastically. Li Tiany took a few steps forward and pointed at Lin Ran. How dare you bring up this question? Are you colluding with those assassins? Lin Ran only looked at the Empress without saying anything. A moment later, the Empress suddenly chuckled. Lord Lin is right. The assassins will try to carry out their mission whenever possible. Naturally, the palace guards can't relax for a moment. It's understandable that they are late. Hearing that, Li Tiany's expression turned ugly. The Empress ignored that. After thinking for a moment, she ordered, eunuchly, you're just following orders. There's naturally nothing wrong with that. However, you have to follow Lord Lu to the hidden sword pavilion again and change the swords for the remaining guards. Thank you, Your Majesty. Lin Ran and Lu Tao bowed in unison, and Li Tiany also did so reluctantly. After settling this conflict, the Empress went straight to the imperial study. Lin Ran and the others went to the hidden sword pavilion again. They walked side by side and looked harmonious, but what was on their minds was very different. Anyone could tell that the Empress was biased towards Lin Ran this time. Li Tiany, as an eunuch who had served 3 previous emperors, was very sensitive to this subtle change of attitude in the emperors. Lin Ran was thinking about how to steal the key to the hidden sword pavilion at night. Lu Tao turned to look at him every few steps, clearly very curious about this new guard commander. Li Tiany, on the other hand, gritted his teeth. He couldn't remember how many times he had been made a fool by Lin Ran. From this moment on, he finally decided to take the initiative to strike back. Just you wait. You're not the first person to talk back to me in the palace, but you'll definitely be the most miserable one. Li Tiany looked at Lin Ran coldly and thought to himself. At this moment, he did not realize how much danger this decision would bring him. In the end, he became Lin Ran's stepping stone in the palace. After the 3 of them returned to the hidden sword pavilion, Li Tiany opened the bronze lock and asked Lu Tao to change the swords for the remaining guards. Lin Ran also took the opportunity to see the appearance of the key and secretly attached a wisp of sword energy to it. If not for this, he wouldn't have bothered to go to the Hall of Mental Cultivation. When the hidden sword pavilion closed again, all the guards had gotten their new swords. Li Tianyi said a few sarcastic words and left in a hurry with the eunuchs. Lin Ran also returned to Mingzhou Hall and waited quietly for the night to make a move. Seeing that there was still some time before the sky turned dark, Lin Ran took out the new Chiman sword technique. This sword technique was difficult to understand at first glance, but with Lin Ran's half-saint comprehension of the martial Tao, it only took him an hour to master the essence. With a thought, the yin-yang sword appeared in his hand. Lin Ran turned his wrist and shot out a sword light. In the next second, he appeared outside the door. Sword light flashed again, and Lin Ran appeared in the corner of the courtyard. He did not leave any trace at all, as if he had been standing there since the beginning. It's a blessing in disguise. I've picked up a treasure this time. Lin Ran couldn't help but feel excited. With the Chiman sword technique and graceful sword moves, he could tour the palace without alerting anyone. It was simply tailor-made for his actions tonight. Chapter 58. Opening the Treasure Vault. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. Opening the Treasure Vault. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. As the sky darkened, Lin Ran changed into his sword god attire and flashed outside the door. The mystic sword technique could enable him to pass through walls, so he did not steal the key anymore and went straight to the Empress's chamber. After finding the 10 miles dragon roar, he went straight to the hidden sword pavilion to open the treasure vault. At the same time, groups of eunuchs holding lanterns were walking in the palace. In a daze, they saw a figure flashing by, but when they looked closely, there was nothing. The thing was that even the guards had encountered such a strange situation. For a long time after that, there were rumors about the night ghost circulating in the palace. At this moment, Lin Ran still didn't know that he had become the protagonist of the rumors. With the convenience of the unique sword technique, he quickly arrived at the Empress's bedroom. At this moment, the sky had just turned dark. The Empress should still be dealing with state affairs in the imperial study. Therefore, Lin Ran was not being overly cautious. After successfully sneaking into the bedroom, he revealed himself and went to the inner room to look for the 10 miles dragon roar. With his ability to sense divine swords, Lin Ran quickly found a brocade box under the bed. Just as he was about to open the brocade box, he heard the sound of a door opening. Lin Ran thought that the Empress had returned and hurriedly hid under the bed. However, a moment later, he saw a purple-robed figure walking in quietly. Li Tianyi. Lin Ran recognized the person and couldn't help but frown in confusion. Why did this eunuch sneak into the Empress's bedroom instead of guarding her? Lin Ran was puzzled, but he did not alert Li Tianyi. He silently watched as Li Tianyi opened a cabinet and crawled in. After a moment, he climbed out, tidied his clothes, and pretended to be calm as he left the bedroom. Lin Ran was confused. After Li Tianyi left, he flashed out and went to the cabinet. This cabinet was about half the height of a person and was made of camphor wood. It was used to temporarily store dragon robes and other outerwear when the Empress went to bed. Now that the Empress was still in the imperial study, the cabinet was naturally empty. However, when Lin Ran opened it, he saw an old standard sword inside. There was a pair of footprints on the bottom of the cabinet. It looked like someone was hiding inside with a weapon but had forgotten to take it with him when he left. What is this damn eunuch trying to do? Lin Ran was puzzled. He accidentally saw the hilt and his eyes narrowed. There was no sword tassel on this standard sword. As a rule, all the swords in the palace had to have a yellow tassel attached to it. However, there was nothing on this sword. It had to be noted that according to the rules, it was not a serious crime for a guard to lose his sword tassel, but he would still be flogged 30 times. Therefore, the guards were very careful not to lose it. There was probably only one standard sword in the palace without a sword tassel, and that was the one used by Lin Ran. Outside the Hall of Mental Cultivation, he had torn the tassel off in front of the Empress and Eunuch Li. In an instant, Lin Ran understood everything. It was already a serious crime to enter the Emperor's bedroom with a weapon, let alone hide in the cabinet. Once the Empress returned and found this sword, Lin Ran wouldn't be able to explain himself. Li Tianyi wanted him dead. You damn eunuch, you can't win in the open, so you started playing dirty, right? Lin Ran smiled, but his eyes were extremely cold. He knew that the Empress wouldn't be fooled by this kind of dirty trick, but Li Tianyi's despicable trick really made Lin Ran want to kill him. After putting the 10 miles dragon roar into the divine sword technique manual, Lin Ran took out the standard sword and flashed out of the bedroom. After arriving at Li Tianyi's residence, Lin Ran took a spare Tai Chi whisk and returned to the Empress's bedroom to put it into the cabinet. Li Tianyi wouldn't be accused of assassination because of a Tai Chi whisk, but he would definitely be scolded by the Empress. This would also lay the foundation for Lin Ran to kill Li Tianyi. Li Tianyi had served 3 previous emperors after all. If Lin Ran insisted on killing him, the Empress would definitely object. However, he did not want to make things difficult for the Empress, so he could only wait a few more days. After making the necessary arrangements, Lin Ran went to the Hidden Sword Pavilion. Only then did he realize that he had thought too simply. The Hidden Sword Pavilion looked ordinary on the surface, but there seemed to be a formation protecting it in secret. If he wanted to barge in forcefully, he would cause a huge commotion. He had to steal the key. Lin Ran easily returned with the key and opened the door of the Hidden Sword Pavilion. In a few seconds, he arrived in front of the huge boulder. With a thought, the dragon roar sword appeared in Lin Ran's hand. Then, he slowly stabbed it into the sword mark on the boulder. Then, the dragon gem on the hilt suddenly lit up. Before Lin Ran could react, the entire boulder began to shake at an extremely high frequency. Buzz, 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 the sound became louder and louder. Soon, the ground began to tremble, and then the surrounding wooden shelves. When Lin Ran realized that something was wrong, the entire Hidden Sword Pavilion began to tremble violently with the boulder. Countless old dust fell from the beams, and tens of thousands of standard swords fell to the ground. The doors, windows, and corridors began to emit a strange sound, as if the entire Hidden Sword Pavilion was about to collapse. D***mn. This is getting serious. Lin Ran's face was pale, not because of fear but guilty of sneaking in here. He thought that he could enter the treasure vault quietly, but he did not expect it to cause such a huge commotion. If the Hidden Sword Pavilion really collapsed, how would he explain it to the Empress? At this moment, all the sounds suddenly quieted down, and a strange silence filled the air. Other than the swords on the ground and the dust falling from the sky, it was as if nothing had happened. Lin Ran didn't know what was going on. He stood rooted to the ground and didn't dare to move. Suddenly, he heard a crack and looked up to see a deep crack on the boulder. A surging sword intent surged out of the crack. It was sharp and filled with killing intent. Lin Ran was caught off guard by the sword intent and couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. The sword intent here was much more ferocious than in the depths of Mount Sword. If not for the fact that he was already a half-saint, he would have been seriously injured. After quickly activating his spiritual energy to protect his body, Lin Ran had time to observe the crack carefully. The crack almost split the boulder into 2. It was just wide enough for a person to pass through. Thanks to the moonlight outside the window, one could vaguely see a stone staircase leading down. Lin Ran took a deep breath, but he still couldn't stop his body from trembling with excitement. If nothing went wrong, the treasure vault should be down there. Chapter 59. The Divine Sword That Shouldn't Be Here. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. The Divine Sword That Shouldn't Be Here. ENVE Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. He had already signed in today. Even if he found a divine weapon, he would not be rewarded. Therefore, Lin Ran's initial plan was to come over and scout the way. After confirming the location of the treasure vault, he would come to sign in tomorrow. However, when he sensed the incomparably pure surging sword intent in the treasure vault, he instantly changed his mind. By the time he reacted, he was already deep down the stone steps. Looking up from where he was, he could only see a beam of faint light above his head. Lin Ran couldn't help but click his tongue. He was at least 50 meters below the ground, but the stone steps in front of him were still winding down without end. The walls on both sides of the stone steps were the same as the ones on Mount Sword. They were rough and dry, but there were no cracks at all. It was as if this was a naturally formed cave. Lin Ran took a deep breath and calmed himself down. With a thought, he summoned the Yin Yang sword. With another thought, the black and white sword burned with raging flames. Holding the Yin Yang sword as a torch, Lin Ran activated the startling sword steps and sped up. Even so, it still took Lin Ran nearly half a minute to finish the journey. Roughly, it was about 7 or 8 miles. The sword intent here was already quite turbulent. Lin Ran didn't even need to deliberately sense it to feel that he was in a storm of sword intent. Most importantly, these sword intents were filled with intense killing intent. After a while, Lin Ran felt a little anxious. He had to focus all his energy to ensure that he was not affected. "I wonder who built this place in the first place," Lin Ran muttered softly and took a few more steps along the corridor. Then, he was blocked by a stone door. More precisely, it was more like a wall, because it blended into the surrounding stone wall perfectly without any gaps. Lin Ran recognized it as a door because he saw something familiar on it. It was a pattern about the size of a table. Although it had been hidden underground for a long time, it still looked quite new. In the middle of the pattern was a 5-pointed star. Each sharp corner was connected to a ring, and inside the ring were strange symbols carved from 5-colored gems, looking like totems of some sorts. Further out were 2 large circles that covered the entire pentagon. The middle of the 2 circles was filled with ciphertext. It did not look like the language used in the Heavenly Saint dynasty. Lin Ran naturally didn't know this language, but he knew that it was a 5-elements array because this array formation was almost identical to the one on Mount Sword's demon subduing tablet. There was no pattern on Mount Sword's demon subduing tablet. However, after Daoist Li passed away, he had strengthened the array formation a few times, so he was familiar with the structure of the array formation. The only difference was that the operating principles of the 2 array formations were completely opposite. The array formation of the demon subduing tablet prevented the things inside from coming out, while the array formation on the stone door prevented the things outside from entering. In other words, this was a lock. Lin Ran leaned closer and realized that the pattern was made of extremely thin golden threads. He didn't know what method the craftsman used, but he couldn't find the finishing point where the threads were connected. It was as if it was drawn on the stone door with molten metal. It seems that this place is indeed related to Mount Sword. I can ask the Empress later. As Lin Ran thought about this, he put the Yin Yang sword back into the Divine Sword Technique manual and replaced it with a wooden sword. This wooden sword was carved from a peachwood. The tip of the sword was round and the blade was blunt. Even in Lin Ran's hand, it was not very powerful. Its only use was to activate the 5-elements array. 5-elements sword technique, metal. Lin Ran slashed out 5 times, and the 5-colored totems on the array formation lit up one after another. Then, with a slight buzz, the entire stone door shattered into dust in front of him. What? This door can only be opened 1 time. Lin Ran subconsciously exclaimed, but in the next second, he was caught off guard. This was because an even more violent and turbulent sword intent surged out from behind the door. Its strength was not inferior to the deepest part of Mount Sword. Apart from the sword intent, the air was also filled with surging and dense killing intent. In a daze, Lin Ran felt as if he was transported to a battlefield. Thousands of soldiers and horses were charging crazily like floods and ferocious beasts. The sounds of killing shook the sky, and everywhere he looked was filled with dust. Sadness, hatred, brutality, killing. Countless negative emotions surged into his heart in an instant. Although the illusion only lasted for a moment, it still made Lin Ran break out in cold sweat. He never thought that a real war would be so cruel. Compared to the war in the illusion, the battle he fought to quell King Zhao's rebellion was nothing. As expected of divine weapons from famous generals, Lin Ran muttered to himself in shock. After taking a few deep breaths to calm himself down, he bowed respectfully to the stone room and walked in with a serious expression. The stone room was not very big, about 30 square meters. Dozens of divine swords were stabbed straight into the uneven ground, as if they were arranged in a specific order. Seeing this scene, Lin Ran suddenly felt a little familiar, as if he had returned to Mount Sword. Lin Ran looked at the nearest sword. The shape of this sword was similar to the swords used by the palace guards. However, the body of the sword was emerald green, as if it was carved from high-quality jade. There was a dark red thread running through the sword. It was so exquisite that it did not look like a weapon. Instead, it looked like some kind of handicraft. This sword looked quite intimidating at first glance, but as long as one sensed it carefully, they would realize that the sword intent on it was not particularly strong. Therefore, Lin Ran did not stare at it for too long. After taking a quick look, he went to study the other divine swords. However, just studying them took up a lot of Lin Ran's time. After all, the divine weapons here were different from those in Mount Sword. Each of them had a story. The sword intents overlapped. In order to determine which was the strongest, Lin Ran had to focus. After an unknown period of time, Lin Ran finally reached the end of the stone room. There was only one sword left in front of him. Unlike the other divine swords, this sword was embedded in the wall. At a glance, Lin Ran knew that this sword must be the most special. Not only because of its special position, but also because he saw two small golden words on the sword. Sacred Abyss. Why is it here? That's not right. Lin Ran looked shocked, as if he had seen something unbelievable. He didn't know much about the famous swords of the Heavenly Saint dynasty, but the Sacred Abyss sword happened to be one of them. Chapter 60. Unintentional Advancement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. Unintentional Advancement. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The Sacred Abyss is the most important treasure of the country. It served the Heavenly Saint Emperor to conquer the world and was as terrifying as the Abyss. That's why it's called the Sacred Abyss. This was the sword of the Heavenly Saint Emperor. Lin Ran frowned, his eyes filled with confusion. Legend had it that after the death of the Heavenly Saint Emperor, the Emperor buried the Sacred Abyss sword in Mount Sword. It was also because of this that Mount Sword's status in the Heavenly Saint dynasty was so high that it was almost equivalent to the second Heavenly Saint Imperial Mausoleum. But if the Sacred Abyss sword was buried in Mount Sword, what was this sword in front of him? Looking at the layout of the stone room, the Sacred Abyss sword was embedded in the wall high above. The remaining divine swords used by the past generals surrounded it, like the scene of the civil and military officials bowing before the emperor. From the looks of it, this Sacred Abyss sword must be quite special, but was it really the sword of the former Heavenly Saint Emperor? Lin Ran forced himself to focus and began to observe the Sacred Abyss sword carefully. The first thing he noticed was the exaggerated grip on the hilt. There were 9 intertwined golden dragons carved on it. Each golden dragon was less than a foot long, but they were carved vividly. Their tails were intertwined into a sword hilt, and their dragon bodies circled around the sword, almost enveloping most of the sword body. The dragon claw was holding all kinds of gems. Even in this dark room, they were still shining brightly. Lin Ran did not know what material the sword was made of, but it was as smooth as a mirror. He could even clearly see his reflection on the sword. Seeing this, Lin Ran knew that this was definitely not a weapon because it was too exquisite. Compared to this sacred abyss sword, the green sword at the entrance was like a fire stick that had been passed down for generations. Compared to a weapon, this was more like a sacrificial item. It was something that the emperor used during grand celebrations like worshipping the heavens and ancestors. Could it be a replica? Lin Ran suddenly had this idea. After all, the royal family valued inheritance the most. After the emperor buried the sacred abyss sword in Mount Sword, he forged another one and used it as the heirloom. Lin Ran knew that it was unlikely because if that was the case, the sacred abyss sword must not be lying here. After a while, Lin Ran stopped thinking about it. After all, he wasn't here to study history. If he was really curious, he would find a chance to ask the empress. With this in mind, Lin Ran walked back among the swords. After having studied them just now, he had already chosen 3 divine swords to sign in with. Coincidentally, Lin Ran had read about these 3 swords in 10 Miles Sword God's letter. To be able to obtain Sword God's approval, they must be top-notch swords. The first one was called Army Breaker. It was the sword of the founding general of the Heavenly Saint Dynasty, Xiao Pingchuan. This person was most famous for leading 300 elite soldiers to attack the enemy camp at night during the founding war. After wiping out 50,000 enemies, he returned unscathed with 300 elite soldiers. Although Lin Ran felt that this legend was exaggerated, it was undeniable that before the 10 Miles Sword God became famous, General Xiao Pingchuan's reputation was almost on par with the current Sword God. The second sword Lin Ran chose was called Thunderbolt. Its original owner was called Lei Qiming. He had countless battle achievements in his life and was the only king with a different surname who was conferred the title after the Heavenly Saint Dynasty was founded. The third sword was called Star Splitter, and it was the only divine sword that Lin Ran chose without a moment of hesitation. This sword was about 3 feet long. The blade was slender like an iron spike, but it was cross-shaped, which meant that it had 4 blades. Unlike the previous 2 swords, which came from prominent generals, the original owner of Star Splitter was the deputy general of the Northern Battlefront. Moreover, she was a female general. Because she was only a deputy general, her name was not that well known. However, she was respected in the army and went by the code name, No One Returned. If the enemy attacked, the deputy general needed to go out of the city to face the enemy. No matter how many enemies were there, as long as this female deputy general led the troops, she never failed to secure the victory. She wouldn't capture her enemies or persuade her enemies to surrender. Instead, she would kill them all even if her enemies had put down their weapons. Even in the war-torn era, this female deputy general's actions were inhuman. Therefore, her contributions were often evened out by her punishment. As a result, even after guarding the Northern Territory for more than 10 years, she was never promoted. The information about her was also deliberately erased, leaving only this unclear legend. Lin Ran didn't want to judge if what the female deputy general did was right or wrong. He only knew that the despairing killing intent of Star Splitter was what he lacked. After cracking down on King Zhao's rebellion, he originally thought that he was no longer burdened by the guilt that came with killing. However, the moment he entered the treasure vault and saw the true cruelty of war in the illusion, he realized that he was still not ready enough. Because his strength had increased too quickly, Lin Ran had never experienced a life-and-death battle that could make people break down in despair. All the battles he had experienced so far were as easy as eating and drinking to him. If he didn't adjust his attitude about killing, he would eventually die in the hands of his enemy. He rarely met a match in the Heavenly Saint Dynasty, but what about outside? Judging from the current situation, there was bound to be a war between the Heavenly Saint Dynasty and the Great Yong Dynasty. Although each country had an agreement that those above the Grandmaster realm were not allowed to participate in the war, if they were at the end of their rope, who would care about that agreement? Therefore, Lin Ran had to be fully prepared. Putting the 3 swords together, Lin Ran sat down in the empty space among the swords. He originally planned to just scout the way, but after spending so much time in the treasure vault, it was probably almost midnight. He might as well wait here for a while so that he didn't have to make a journey back again. Now that Lin Ran was somewhat used to the sword intent here, amidst the surging sword intent, he didn't feel as uncomfortable as when he had just entered. What? Half an hour later, Lin Ran suddenly opened his eyes in surprise. Perhaps it was because he had been affected by the sword intent for too long, but he seemed to feel that some shackles in his body were showing signs of loosening. Puzzled, Lin Ran hurriedly activated his spiritual energy to remove the restriction he had cast on his cultivation. In an instant, an extremely pure and sharp sword intent seeped out of his body. As it circled in the air, Lin Ran's power also leveled up steadily. Senior Martial Master, Grandmaster, Senior Grandmaster, First Level Half Saint. Second Level. Third Level.